And today, we're embarking on a pretty high-stakes intellectual expedition. We're tackling Friedrich Nietzsche's 1886 polemic, Beyond Good and Evil, Prelude to a Philosophy of the Future.
Right, and if you really want to understand the engine driving Nietzsche's entire body of work, I mean, his core ideas on morality, truth, power, this is really the indispensable text.
It absolutely is. It's more than just a philosophy book.
It's like a declaration of war.
Exactly. A declaration of war against what he saw as the foundational moral and metaphysical lies of the West. This book is a radical challenge to our most ingrained beliefs about knowledge, philosophy, morality, religion.
All the big ones.
All of them. Nietzsche viewed these pillars not as eternal truths, but as, cultural manifestations of human weakness, often guiding us toward what he saw as cultural disaster.
But importantly, this dive isn't just about critique, right? It's not just tearing things down. When he demolishes the old architecture, he introduces his own constructive views.
That's the key. He's offering blueprints for his new philosophical elite. We will uncover his core concepts: perspectivism, the all-pervasive will to power, and this concept of human nobility, which he calls Vornehmheit.
Vornehmheit, okay.
Yeah, it's kind of spiritual aristocracy that he sees as necessary for liberation from what he termed oppressive tradition.
Now, anyone who's ever tried to read Nietzsche immediately notices the unique style. It's highly aphoristic, it's intense, it's very personal.
It really is. It reads less like a dry academic paper and more like an intellectual diary, tied intrinsically to his own precarious existence.
Yeah, you have to consider the man himself.
You really do. Our sources remind us Nietzsche was plagued by chronic illness, nervous ailments, profound solitude. He was, to be blunt, a psychosomatic wreck.
So his texts aren't detached, objective statements.
Not at all. They are powerful narratives, they're experiments in thought, and they're aimed at those rare individuals who might share his existential background and appreciate his deep-seated critique of late 19th century bourgeois culture.
And his primary method for this critique is what he called the genealogical method.
That's right. It's a multi-perspectival approach. He doesn't argue in, straight logic. He merges psychological hypotheses, looking at the unconscious drives, with causal explanations, historical observations, and even linguistic considerations.
So he's trying to uncover the surprising and often not so noble origins of our most sacred concepts.
Exactly. It's philosophy performed as a dangerous experiment.
Okay, let's unpack this immediately by diving into the first major section, where Nietzsche lays the critical foundation for the entire project.
Absolutely.
We must begin with the concept of values.
Right. Nietzsche asserts that life is value-oriented. It's impossible to live without values. But, and this is the revolutionary claim, he says there are no values out there waiting to be discovered. There's no ontological fact dictating what is good or true.
So if values aren't fixed in reality, then they have to be created. That completely shifts the philosophical question, doesn't it?
It does. It moves the focus from what is true to what is the origin of these values. Since there's no common or objective purpose of life, value creation becomes the prerogative of the powerful few.
Who are they?
The real philosophers, the unique artists, the founders of religions. They're the ones who create these constitutive values that are strong enough to force cultural and social acceptance, which then, hardens into truth.
And Nietzsche's goal is to scrutinize those processes and, more importantly, the people who establish them. This leads us directly to aphorism 2, where he challenges the entire structure of traditional metaphysics.
The foundational error, he argues, is the belief in the opposition of values.
The opposition of values, okay.
Metaphysicians have always assumed that high-value things like truth, reason, selfless action must originate entirely separately from low-value things: error, deception, passion, self-interest. They look for the ground of high values in the thing in itself or the lap of being, completely divorcing them from the earthly, messy world.
So they're assuming if something is good, its origin has to be good.
Exactly. And Nietzsche calls this metaphysical assumption, which underpins centuries of Western logical procedure, merely a prejudice. He suggests this opposition is perhaps only a foreground appraisal, a provisional limited perspective, may be seen only from a frog perspective, as he colorfully puts it.
And here's where we get to the radical, kind of terrifying thought that defines the Beyond Good and Evil project.
Go on.
What if appearance, deception, and self-interest have a higher and more fundamental value for the enhancement and preservation of life than truth and truthfulness?
That is the central audacious question. He dares to entertain the notion that the things we deem good and honorable might be inextricably linked, bound, or, tied to what we call their evil opposites.
So they might be essentially the same force, just interpreted differently?
Precisely. And this requires a new breed of philosophers, the philosophers of the dangerous perhaps, who are willing to take charge of this terrifying question without collapsing into moral judgment.
This skepticism extends to the supposed purity of reason itself. In Aphorism 3, he basically suggests that philosophical thought isn't a product of cold, pure dialectic.
No, it's driven by instinct. This is a deep psychological cut, aimed at humbling the intellectual. He argues that our conscious logical procedures are often just rationalizations, disguises for deep-seated physiological requirements for preserving a certain type of life.
Can you give an example?
Sure. The philosophical assumption that the determinate is worth more than the indeterminate. He'd say that's an aesthetic and preservative choice necessary for our type of human existence, but it's still only an appraisal, not some eternal truth.
So when a philosopher thinks they're following logic, they're actually following a deeply ingrained, almost biological requirement for cultural preservation.
Precisely. The logic simply dresses the instinct in formal clothes, which leads directly to Aphorism 5, one of his most famous accusations. Philosophers lack genuine honesty.
Right. They act as if their convictions spring forth from cold, pure, divinely insouciant dialectic.
When in reality, they take a personal whim, a deeply felt fervent wish, or a passionate conjecture, something rooted in their temperament, and then spend the rest of their career defending it with rationalizations after the fact. They are, he says, sly spokesmen for prejudices that they baptize as the truth.
And he provides some famously cutting examples of this dishonesty.
Oh, he does. He points to Kant, criticizing his use of stiff yet demure tartuffery to lure people toward the categorical imperative.
Tartuffery, so hypocritical piety.
Yeah, moral pretense. Nietzsche is suggesting Kant pretended his moral mandate was a logical necessity discovered through pure reason, when it was actually a predetermined personal desire Kant sought to enforce. He also criticizes Spinoza's use of mathematical form to disguise his own deeply personal philosophy, which was rooted in the personal timidity and vulnerability of a sick hermit.
The math hides the man.
The math hides the man. It forces us, the readers, to constantly look past the logic and focus on the personality, the underlying will, and the psychological needs of the philosopher.
It's all about the psychology.
It's the psychological investigation, what Nietzsche's calling the morphology of the will to power, that uncovers the real philosophy. And this perspective informs his discussion in Aphorism 10 on the problem of the real and apparent world.
Why are thinkers so eager to oppose appearance, even to the point of dismissing their own bodies?
Nietzsche suggests that stronger, livelier thinkers who take sides against appearance are not motivated by pure truth. They are driven by an instinct to reappropriate something they feel they have lost, something that used to make life stronger and more cheerful. Perhaps the concept of the immortal soul or the old god.
So it's not a historical regression, but more of an existential flight from modern reality.
It's the drive to get away from the bric-a-brac of concepts that modern positivism markets. They despise the flimsy, fragmented modernity of their age and want to escape its limitations. They just lack the strength and courage to get up and out into a new future, so they try to go backward instead.
This critique culminates in Aphorism 11, where he just skewers Kant's pride in discovering the table of categories and synthetic judgments a priori.
Right. Kant was so proud of discovering a new faculty in humans that made these universally valid judgments possible. But Nietzsche dismisses his explanation, asking how such judgments are possible and answering by virtue of a faculty as comical niaiserie allemande, or German silliness.
Because it's a tautology. It's just repeating the question.
Exactly. It's like saying opium makes you sleep because it has a dormitive virtue. It explains nothing.
And this false pride, he claims, launched the entire Romantic movement in Germany.
Yes, the honeymoon of German philosophy. Young theologians like Schelling ran off into the bushes looking for new faculties, like intellectual intuition. Nietzsche notes that in this innocent, youthful age, people failed to distinguish between discovering, Finden, and inventing, Erfinden. It was an enthusiastic dream that shows the dangerous consequence of philosophical dishonesty born out of national pride.
Okay, that brings us to section 2, where he introduces the central unifying concept of his philosophy, the will to power.
Yes, introduced in Aphorism 13. He begins by challenging the foundational biological assumption of Western philosophy, that life's primary drive is self-preservation.
A direct attack on Spinoza and Darwin.
A huge one. Nietzsche argues that the belief that life's goal is merely to survive is insufficient. It's a symptom of a diminished life. If life merely wanted to survive, it would conserve energy and avoid risk. But we see chaotic, dynamic engagement everywhere.
So what does life primarily want, if not to preserve itself?
A living thing primarily wants to discharge its strength, to expand, grow, dominate, and overcome resistance. Life itself is will to power.
And self-preservation.
It's merely a frequent consequence of a successful discharge of power, not the driving goal. This allows him to sweep away what he calls superfluous teleological principles.
So every entity, from a molecule to an empire, is fundamentally engaged in a power struggle to realize its maximum potential.
Precisely. And in Aphorism 36, he tries to transform this into an ontological principle. If our internal world of desires and passions, which we experience directly as power dynamics, is the only given reality, could this be enough to explain the entire mechanistic world?
How so?
He proposes that the world, described with respect to its intelligible character, would be just this will to power and nothing else. Even matter, to him, must be understood as a degenerative or paralyzed form of will to power.
Okay, so if this all-encompassing force is will, Aphorism 19 gives us a crucial psychological breakdown of the act of willing, arguing against Schopenhauer that it is not simple.
Right. Nietzsche says the word will is complicated, unified only by popular prejudice. He breaks it down into three ingredients. First, a plurality of feelings. The feeling of the state we move away from, the state we move toward, and the feelings of the movements themselves. It's a cluster of sensations, not a singular drive.
And second,
There has to be a commandeering thought, a guiding idea. The thought can't be divorced from the will. It provides direction to that cluster of feelings.
and the third ingredient, where the psychological complexity really hits.
The will is fundamentally an affect. The affect of the command, the feeling of superiority with respect to something that must obey. This consciousness is captured in the phrase, I am free, it must obey.
And this creates a peculiar duality.
Exactly. We are both the commander and the obedient one simultaneously.
And we resolve this internal contradiction through a kind of self-deception.
We ignore the complexity and deceive ourselves using the synthetic concept of the I, which assumes a singular, unified consciousness acting freely. The perceived freedom of the will is really just the pleasure derived from commanding and then identifying oneself with the accomplished act. We attribute the success of the action to the will itself, which gives us an increase in the feeling of power.
The analogy he provides for this internal complexity is powerful. The body is a society constructed out of many souls.
Right? And willing is simply the commanding and obeying within this internal hierarchical society. It's a microcosm of the will to power. The highest effect within this society dominates the lower effects, and that sensation of command is what we mistakenly call free will.
So the philosopher should understand willing not as some mystical, simple act, but within the framework of morality.
Which itself is just the doctrine of the power relations under which life arises.
Aphorism 20 then connects the consistency of philosophical thought across diverse cultures like Indian, Greek, and German to something seemingly arbitrary: grammar.
It's a fascinating point. He argues that philosophical concepts aren't accidental. They revolve in a definite basic scheme. This family resemblance in philosophizing is rooted in linguistic affinities.
A common philosophy of grammar.
Yes. The unconscious domination by similar grammatical structures leads to similar philosophical systems.
So the structure of the language we speak imposes a structure on the philosophy we create.
Pretty much. Philosophizing in this sense is a type of atavism, a recurrence of a lost trait, or a remembrance of a primordial economy of the soul. If your language emphasizes the subject-verb-object structure, you are naturally inclined toward believing in a subject, the soul that acts independently.
And if your language is different,
If you speak a language like, say, from the Ural-Altaic group, where the concept of the subject is poorly developed, you are likely to see the world very differently. He concludes that the spell of particular grammatical functions is, in the last analysis, the spell of physiological valuations.
this leads to the ultimate conclusion of this section in Aphorism 23. All psychology so far has been limited by moral prejudices.
This is his call for a new science. A genuine physiopsychology must be grasped as the morphology and doctrine of the development of the will to power. This is an uncomfortable task because it has, as he says, the heart against it.
Because it requires sailing straight over and away from morality.
Precisely. It demands studying the derivation of all good drives from the bad. The effects of hatred, envy, greed, and power lust are not moral failings. They are the conditioning effects of life and need to be present and enhanced where life itself is enhanced. This is the enormous, untouched realm of dangerous knowledge that requires the philosopher to be an intrepid voyager willing to crush and destroy the remnants of their own morality.
Okay. Part 2 introduces the kind of thinker required for this monumental task, the free spirit. And we begin, paradoxically, with the necessity of the will to untruth in aphorism 24.
It's a great paradox. Nietzsche observes that human life demands a strange simplification and falsification. To enjoy life, we must intentionally embrace ignorance, thoughtlessness, and recklessness. We give our senses carte blanche for the superficial because the deep truth is often paralyzing.
So human happiness requires a degree of vital, necessary blindness.
Absolutely. And this provides the foundation for his critique of science. He argues that science, the supposed champion of truth, could only arise on a solidified granite foundation of ignorance.
How so?
The will to know rises up on the foundation of a much more powerful will. The will to not know, to uncertainty, to untruth. Science is not the opposite of error, but its refinement. Being alive, science loves life, and therefore, in a profound sense, it loves the errors necessary for its flourishing.
Aphorism 25 gives some existential advice to this new breed of free spirits. They have to beware of martyrdom and defending the truth.
Right. If you defend the truth constantly, you become stubborn, personal, and brutish. You sacrifice the innocence and fine objectivity of your conscience. Nietzsche says the truth is not a bungling little thing that she needed defenders.
So the advice is to hide, use masks, and choose the good solitude.
They must run away, choosing a high-spirited, light-hearted solitude to remain pure and untainted by the vulgarity of defense. The mask protects the vulnerable, complex, and profound interior. The philosopher must constantly avoid the urge to become too personal or fearful, which ruins the required objective distance.
Yet aphorism 26 introduces a necessary contradiction. To gain the greatest knowledge, the free spirit has to occasionally seek out the norm, the average.
This is the hard path. While every choice human being seeks secrecy and solitude, rescued from the majority, the philosopher predestined for knowledge must eventually say, to hell with good taste. The norm is more interesting than the exception.
He has to wend his way downwards into bad company, studying the average man, the common drives.
Yes, this is the least pleasant, most foul-smelling part of a philosopher's life. He needs to listen closely to cynics, people who easily recognize the animal, the commonplace, the norm within themselves, and talk about it without moral indignation. He warns that the angry man is the one who lies the most, because his perspective is warped by his moralizing affect.
In aphorism 28, Nietzsche introduces a pretty unexpected cultural critique via the tempo of style.
He argues that the tempo of a style is physiologically grounded, tied to the average tempo of metabolism of a race. This tempo is the hardest thing to translate. Germans, he claims, are almost incapable of presto. They are ponderous, solemn, and awkwardly slow in their language and thought.
And this lumbering German tempo hinders them from truly understanding free-spirited thought, like Machiavelli or Aristophanes.
Absolutely. Those thinkers require an allegrissimo tempo, a quick, mischievous application of speed and mood to long, tough, and dangerous thoughts. He even critiques Goethe's prose for mixing the stiff and the delicate, reflecting a German Rococo taste. This lack of presto is seen as hindering the very ability to think freely and rapidly synthesize complex, amoral ideas.
Aphorism 30 highlights the necessity of esoteric teaching, directly related to the need for masks and the order of rank.
Right. High insights must sound like stupidities or crimes to those unsuited for them. The distinction between exoteric and esoteric is not about knowing or not knowing a secret fact, it's about perspective. The exoteric sees things up from below, judging by common values, while the esoteric sees them down from above.
And from the esoteric height, tragedy ceases to be tragic.
Right. There are heights of the soul from which the world's many woes do not compel pity. What is food for the higher man must be poisonous to the lesser man. This justifies concealment and the use of masks to protect the ideas from being vulgarized by the general public.
Aphorism 32 marks a huge shift in the critique of morality, the overcoming of the morality of intentions.
Morality, Nietzsche observes, has been fixated on the value of the action's intention, the conscious thought behind it. He argues that this focus is a prejudice, a preliminary stage of thought like astrology or alchemy. The new philosophers suspect the decisive value lies in the unintentional aspect of an action.
Intention is merely a surface symptom requiring interpretation.
That's it. So if intention is just a symptom, then the goal is the overcoming of morality itself, leading to an extramoral period. This is the secret labor of the genuinely honest conscience, transcending morality as mere prejudice, realizing that intention is only skin deep and conceals more than it reveals about the true underlying drives of the will to power.
Given this new lens, we have to be cautious of anything that feels too virtuous. Aphorism 33 warns us specifically against disinterestedness.
Yes, we must ruthlessly scrutinize the morality of self-abnegation, sacrifice, and the aesthetic of disinterested contemplation. These feelings, where we claim we act not for myself, contain too much sugar and sorcery. The fact that they are pleasing is not an argument in their favor. It's a red flag demanding caution, as they might be mere seductions of the self-deceived will.
This skepticism is then applied to our perception of reality in Aphorism 34.
The erroneousness of the world we think we live in, the fact that we live in necessary illusions, is the most certain and solid fact. Belief in immediate certainties is a moral naivete that philosophers should avoid. The philosopher has a duty to be suspicious, to squint as maliciously as possible out of every abyss of mistrust. Stop being merely moral in your search for truth.
Aphorism 36 then reiterates the will to power as reality, trying to explain the mechanistic world through our internal power dynamics.
Right. If our desires and passions, the internal dynamics of commanding and obeying, are the only given reality we truly know, then unifying the world requires seeing the mechanistic universe from this inside perspective, as the will to power and nothing else.
Aphorism 39 gives us the brutal metric of spiritual strength, the capacity to withstand truth.
Happiness and virtue are irrelevant to truth. A thing can be true, even if it is harmful and dangerous to the highest degree. The crucial metric is the strength of a spirit, measured by how much truth he can endure, or how much he requires that truth to be thinned out, veiled over, sweetened up, dumbed down, and lied about.
Which is why he cites Stendhal. To be a good philosopher, you must be dry, clear, without illusion. A banker who has made a fortune has part of the character required to see clearly what is.
Yes, it requires ruthless, unsentimental tough-mindedness, a cold eye for the facts, much like a successful financier who has mastered the reality of power and value exchange. Sentimentality is the enemy of truth.
Aphorism 40 brings us back to concealment, the necessity of masks.
Everything profound loves masks. The profound thinker instinctively needs speech to be silent and concealed. Why? Because to reveal the profound thought in its raw form is to immediately invite vulgarization and misunderstanding. The man with something precious to hide rolls through life rough and round like an old, green, heavy-hooped wine cask.
Shame is resourceful. Malicious cunning often conceals goodness.
It's a necessary armor.
Aphorism 41 defines the ultimate test of independence for this free spirit, conserving oneself.
The free spirit must not be stuck to any person, homeland, pity, or even their own field of study. They must avoid becoming attached to their own virtues, such as liberality, which can become a vice for rich souls who spend themselves extravagantly. This ability to maintain distance and self-possession is the greatest test.
Finally, Aphorism 44 distinguishes the true philosophers of the future from the levelers.
Right. The philosophers of the future will be free spirits, but more, they are the commanders, not the followers. He contrasts them sharply with the modern democratic levelers, the eloquent scribblers and slaves of democratic taste who lack solitude.
The levelers who seek the universal green pasture happiness of the herd.
Their doctrine is rooted in equal rights and sympathy for all that suffers, viewing suffering as something that must be abolished. The true new philosophers, however, believe that strength comes from danger, compulsion, violence, and tyranny. They hold that everything evil serves to enhance the species' humanity. They are the born, sworn, jealous friends of solitude, the aristocratic souls who stand against the democratic wave.
Okay, let's move into part 3, the religious character. Aphorism 46 is a direct challenge. Christian faith as a protracted suicide of reason.
He argues that the faith demanded by early Christianity, rising in the skeptical, tolerant Roman world, required an act of intellectual violence, a protracted suicide of reason. It's a tough, worm-like reason that cannot be killed with a single stroke.
So Christian faith is the act of sacrificing freedom, pride, and the self-confidence of the spirit.
Precisely. It required self-derision and self-mutilation. The formula God on the cross was a bold, questioning inversion, promising a revaluation of all antiquity's values. Nietzsche interprets this as the revenge of the Orient, the Oriental slave on Rome's noble tolerance and freedom from faith. The slaves, unable to tolerate uncertainty, demanded the unconditional.
This emphasis on power underlies his analysis of the saint in Aphorism 51.
Powerful, life-affirming people venerate the saint not out of meek piety, but because they sense a superior force in him. an astonishing strength of will that chooses to test itself through extreme self-conquest and final renunciation. In honoring the saint, they honor the will to power within themselves. They see the strength required to master and negate the natural drives.
Aphorism 56 pushes beyond the conventional pessimism of Schopenhauer and Buddha to introduce the world-affirming ideal.
Right. Looking past good and evil opens the eyes to the inverse ideal, the most high-spirited, vital, world-affirming individual. This person doesn't just accept what was and is, but passionately wants it again, just as it was and is through all eternity.
The famous doctrine of eternal recurrence.
Insatiably shouting da capo. This profound, total affirmation is the ultimate measure of strength and nobility.
In Aphorism 60, he defines nobility in terms of motivation, specifically regarding the love of humanity.
He says that to love humanity for the sake of God was the noblest and most bizarre feeling achieved so far. That divine ulterior motive provided the necessary high standard and subtlety. However, loving humanity without this sanctifying ulterior motive, as modern democratic humanists attempt, is simply one more stupidity and abomination. It lacks the necessary aristocratic or sublime perspective.
And finally, Aphorism 61 presents the core critique that religion, particularly Christianity, leads to the deterioration of the European race.
It's a radical claim based on his view of natural selection applied to spirit. Religions tend to stand all valuations on their head. They actively work against the survival of the highest types of people who suffer the most precisely because they are deep and sensitive by siding with the failures as a matter of principle. These are religions of the suffering.
How exactly does this cause deterioration?
By crushing the strong, striking down great hopes, and twisting every conquering manly instinct into self-destruction. They invert the love of the earth into hatred against the earthly, thereby preserving too much of what should be destroyed from a biological and spiritual perspective. They melt the unworldly and higher man into a single diminished feeling, resulting in a lower average level for the type man.
Okay, part 4 is Nietzsche's Entrex. It's over 100 short, sharp insights into human psychology and morality. We should probably group them thematically to get a handle on them.
Good idea. Let's start with honesty and self-deception. One of his most crucial insights here is in Aphorism 108. There are absolutely no moral phenomena, only a moral interpretation of the phenomena. This is ultimate perspectivism. Actions are neutral until we impose a moralizing framework on them.
And that framework is often built on self-deception, like in Aphorism 68 regarding memory and pride.
That's a classic psychological mechanism. Memory says, I did that. But pride, the self-preserving instinct for a favorable self-image, says, I couldn't have done that. And memory immediately gives in. Pride actively falsifies our own past experiences to maintain psychological equilibrium.
He also critiques the notion of pure knowledge. Aphorism 64. Knowledge for its own sake is the final snare morality has laid.
It's the ultimate trap. When we think we are pursuing knowledge purely, we are often driven by a psychological need for confession, exposure, or a moral framework that validates our intellectual superiority. Aphorism 65 says, knowledge would have little charm without so much shame to overcome.
Implying the drive to know is often driven by a need to expose either ourselves or others.
Exactly. And what about the sage? Aphorism 71 advises the knower must overcome the feeling of awe or reverence toward knowledge. If you still experience the stars as something over you, you don't have the eyes of a knower.
So you have to achieve genuine objectivity.
Stripping away moral or emotional judgment. Aphorism 80 reframes the Delphic Council, know yourself. Perhaps it meant, stop letting anything matter to you, become objective. Self-knowledge in this sense is detachment, a kind of necessary coldness.
That seems like a dangerous path toward cynicism, which he himself warned against.
It is a path of necessary pain. Aphorism 81 asks, is truth so salted that it doesn't quench thirst anymore? The harsh truth is often unbearable, forcing us to dilute or falsify it to survive. This requires that spiritual strength we talked about earlier.
Let's shift to character. What defines a truly high man according to Aphorism 72?
It's not the momentary strength of high feelings, but their duration. Sustained intensity and consistency define genuine nobility. Furthermore, Aphorism 116 suggests that the great epochs of our lives come when we gather the courage to reconceive our evils as what is best in us, embrace the dark drives, harness them, and interpret them as sources of power.
This leads to the theme of love and relationships. Aphorism 153 offers a synthesis of his extra-moral position. Whatever is done out of love takes place beyond good and evil.
Love, as a powerful, commanding drive, transcends conventional moral judgment. It's a force that creates its own values. However, Nietzsche is skeptical of sentimental love. Aphorism 175 confirms this focus on desire. In the end, we love our desires and not the thing desired. The object is merely a placeholder for the intensity of our own will.
And aphorism 168 notes how Christianity poisoned this vital force.
By introducing concepts of sin and asceticism, Christianity gave Eros poison to drink. It didn't kill Eros, but it degenerated him into a vice. It contaminated natural, passionate drives by requiring self-denial and moralizing interpretation, making healthy passion feel like a sin.
Finally, let's revisit the idea of social deception. Aphorism 138 is pretty profound regarding our daily interactions.
It is startling. He says that when we are awake, we do the same thing as when we are dreaming. We first invent and create the people we are dealing with, and then forget it immediately. We project personalities, motives, and complexities onto others based on our own internal needs and expectations, and then we treat that projection as reality. It's the foundation of all social interaction, and it's a constant, necessary lie.
All right, part 5. On the natural history of morals. Aphorism 186 argues that while European moral sentiment is subtle, the science of morals is crude.
He dismisses the traditional philosophers who demanded to ground morality, taking morality itself as a fixed, given fact. This, he says, is crass pride.
So instead of grounding it, what is the necessary task?
A preliminary typology of morals. This involves collecting historical and psychological material, formulating concepts, and ordering the tremendous realm of value feelings. It's an exercise in description and categorization, not prescription. It requires the subtlest hands and senses to map the varieties of human moral systems.
Aphorism 187 then applies perspectivism directly to moral claims.
The question is never the objective truth of a claim like there is a categorical imperative. The genuine question is, what does that claim tell us about the psychological state of the person who makes it? Moralities are tools used to justify, calm, crucify, hide, or take revenge. Therefore, even morality is just a sign language of the effects. It reveals the internal hierarchy of drives within the creator.
This emphasis on internal needs leads to a paradoxical insight in Aphorism 188, the necessity of obedience.
Yes. Philosophers must reject lesser hour letting go and excessive freedom. What seems essential in heaven and on earth is that there be obedience in one direction for a long time. This tyrannical discipline, forcing the spirit to think within rigid, long-standing schemes like Christian dogmatics or Aristotelian logic, is not inherently bad.
It breeds strength.
Yes. This long unfreedom of spirit has bred strength, curiosity, and subtle agility into the European spirit. Slavery, in both crude and refined senses, is the indispensable means of disciplining and breeding the spirit. He sees nature's rule. It must crush and ruin force and spirit for enhancement to occur. We must accept the cruelty inherent in breeding higher types.
That is a deeply unsettling and controversial claim, connecting the necessary tyranny of the past to our current intellectual strength.
It forces us to confront the idea that comfort and freedom are not necessarily precursors to excellence. Excellence requires sustained, violent self-discipline and external constraint.
If obedience is so ingrained, Aphorism 199 discusses how this affects commanders in modern Europe.
Because the herd instinct for obedience has been inherited, the average person has a formal conscience that needs to follow. But this has happened at the cost of the art of commanding. The result is the moral hypocrisy of the commanders.
So leaders pretend they're only obeying.
Exactly. Modern leaders, politicians, CEOs, pretend they're only obeying higher commands for servants of the people, instruments of the common weal, to protect themselves from their own bad consciences about wielding power.
They can't admit they command. They must claim they serve.
It's a defense mechanism against democratic pressure. They borrow herd maxims to justify their power, leading to a culture where genuine commanding spirits are rare or disguised.
And this results in the triumph of herd morality in Aphorism 202.
European morality today is the morality of herd animals. This has gained predominance through the growing physiological approximation of people, the intense mixing of classes and races resulting in a lower common denominator. This morality ruthlessly declares, I am morality itself and nothing else is moral.
And he sees the democratic movement as the direct heir to Christianity.
Yes. It seeks to abolish masters and slaves. Nid unimetre. It is hostility towards all special claims, rights, and privileges, striving for universal equality. It is a movement that is physiologically symptomatic of the average, and its tempo is slow, leading toward a standardized, comfortable, but ultimately diminished state of humanity.
Okay, part 6. We scholars. He turns the critical lens onto the intellectual elite of his time. Aphorism 204 discusses the misjudgment of the philosopher.
Right. The real philosopher is often confused with the scientific man or the ideal scholar. But the philosopher lives unphilosophically, unwisely, and feels the weight and duty of 100 experiments and temptations. He doesn't seek mere knowledge. He seeks the right to render a judgment on the value of life itself, which requires more than just objective fact collection.
This distinction is crucial in Aphorism 207, which ruthlessly examines the objective spirit.
The objective spirit, the ideal scholar, is one of the most expensive tools there is, but he is only a tool, not an end in himself. He is a mirror, subordinating himself to anything that wants to be known. He sacrifices his self, his desires, and his individuality for the sake of neutrality.
The cost is personal devastation.
His person is accidental and disruptive. He struggles to think back on himself. His love and hatred are forced or artificial. He only knows how to be sincere with objective. He does not command or destroy. Nietzsche calls him the caput mortuum, the worthless residue of his own necessary self-sacrifice. He is indispensable, but spiritually inert.
Aphorism 208 provides a massive critique of skepticism, defining it not as intellectual freedom, but as a physiological decline.
He is deeply suspicious of skepticism, calling it the most spiritual expression of weak nerves or a sickly constitution. It originates when long-separated races or classes are suddenly interbred, creating a hybrid where internal forces inhibit each other and the soul lacks a center of balance.
So skepticism becomes a form of spiritual inertia, a preference for comfort.
It's the soft, sweet, soothing poppy flower used as a defense against life's deeper, agonizing issues. The most profoundly sick and degenerate thing about such cultural hybrids is the will. They lack the bold pleasure of willing and the conviction to take a stand. Contemporary Europe, due to its absurdly sudden mixing of classes and races, is skeptical from top to bottom.
The philosophers of the future, discussed in Aphorism 210, must be the antidote to this soft skepticism.
These new philosophers will be critics, yes, but primarily they will be engaged in experiments. They will possess certainty of value standards, unity of method, sly courage, and a capacity for responsibility. They will take pleasure in saying no and in level-headed cruelty, guiding the knife with assurance even when the heart is bleeding.
They will scorn feminine idealisms and demand rigor.
They will not want philosophy to merely please or elevate them. They demand critical discipline, rigor, and cleanliness. Yet they will not want to be called critics, asserting that critics are merely tools of philosophy. Nietzsche puts Kant in this category, calling him only a great critic, a tool, not a creator.
And Aphorism 213 concludes this section with a profoundly anti-democratic claim about the prerequisite for philosophy.
Right. Thinking, for the true philosopher, is not slow toil, but light, divine, and related to dance. The highest problems repel anyone not predestined by stature and power of spirituality. Access is restricted.
And he ties this restriction to bloodline.
Yes, bloodline is decisive. Only your descent, your ancestry, can give you a right to philosophy, not merely academic success or intellectual effort. The preparatory labor, the sustained discipline of many generations is needed for a philosopher to come about. This reflects his belief in the necessity of rank, order, and high breeding for spiritual excellence.
Okay, part 7, our virtues. This is a ruthless re-examination of our most cherished virtues, starting with the psychological origin of moral judgment in Aphorism 219, the spiritualization of malice.
Moral judgment and condemnation is the favorite revenge of the spiritually limited on those who are less so. It's a way to compensate for having been slighted by nature and an opportunity to acquire spirit and become refined malice spiritualizes.
They need the standard of equality to feel superior.
Precisely. That's why they fight for the equality of all before God and oppose atheism. High spirituality, Nietzsche claims, is ultimately a monstrous product of moral qualities, specifically the spiritualization of justice, which preserves the order of rank, not equality.
Aphorism 220 revisits the critique of disinterestedness.
The term disinterested is popular because the average person finds higher interests uninteresting. For the higher man, a disinterested action is simply a very interesting and interested action, just motivated by a complex higher order will.
He maintains there is no true unegoistic action.
Anyone who sacrifices wanted and got something in return, perhaps more in general, or to feel like more. The human will is always self-affirming. The idea of pure selflessness is a pleasing moral fiction.
Aphorism 225 presents Nietzsche's powerful concept of pity against pity, directed at utilitarians and hedonists who seek to abolish suffering.
These systems are naive foreground ways of thinking, measuring value by pleasure and pain. Nietzsche's higher, more far-sighted pity is alarmed because by seeking to abolish suffering, you are making humanity smaller. Well-being, as utilitarians understand it, is an end state that makes decline desirable.
So suffering is necessary for advancement.
The discipline of suffering, of great suffering, has been the sole cause of every enhancement in humanity so far. Humans are a combination of creature, what needs to be molded, broken, and burned, and creator, the hammer hardness. Conventional pity is aimed at the creature, but our inverted pity fights against conventional pity as the worst of all pampering and weaknesses. The philosopher must not pity what must be overcome.
Aphorism 227 defines the sole virtue of the free spirit: genuine honesty or Redlichkeit.
Redlichkeit is harsh, unyielding honesty. Every virtue, however, tends towards stupidity. They must stay harsh, the last of the Stoics, and use their devils like disgust, curiosity, and the will to power to help their god, their honesty. They must beware of becoming stupid to the point of holiness, as the Russians say.
Aphorism 229 is one of the most provocative claims. High culture is based on the spiritualization and deepening of cruelty.
The wild animal in humanity has not been killed. It has become divine. Cruelty is what constitutes the painful sensuality of tragedy, and what pleases us in tragic pity or the sublime derives sweetness from this intervening component of cruelty. We enjoy the spectacle of powerful destruction.
And this extends to self-directed cruelty.
Yes, the pleasure in self-directed cruelty is evident in religious self-denial and puritanical penitential spasms. Even the knower, forcing his spirit against its inclination, acts as an artist of cruelty. There's a drop of cruelty in every wanting to know, because the self resists the necessary violence of truth.
Aphorism 230 explains the fundamental will of the spirit as a commanding will, willing simplicity out of multiplicity.
The spirit seeks to dominate itself and its surroundings, appropriating new elements by assimilating the new to the old like a stomach. This need for domination includes an occasional will to ignorance, closing windows, contentment with darkness, and a willingness to deceive others by using masks.
And this internal conflict is the crucible of the philosopher.
The knower's sublime tendency to be thorough and profound meets resistance from this fundamental will to appearance and simplicity. This internal friction is the cruelty of the intellectual conscience, the painful necessity of violating one's own comfort for the sake of deeper knowledge.
We should probably address aphorisms 231-237, which contain Nietzsche's often cited and controversial truths about women.
We should. And Nietzsche himself prefaces these by saying that a thinker cannot change his views on men and women, only reinforce them. These are solely his truths, products of his subjective perspective rooted in his 19th century context.
What are the key observations here, keeping in mind the context of his time?
Well, he claims that woman's greatest folly, 232, is believing love can accomplish all things. He also offers a cultural critique, 234, arguing that the complete absence of reason in the kitchen has caused the longest delays and worst damage to humanity, a critique of domestic chaos. And regarding the ideal, 236, he notes that while Dante and Goethe believe the eternal feminine draws us upward, noble women object, believing this about the eternal masculine. These are psychological observations aimed at overturning the prevailing romanticized view of women, replacing one prejudice with another, perhaps harsher set of observations.
All right, part 8, Peoples and Fatherlands. This is Nietzsche's cultural critique of Europe, beginning with his own country, Germany, seen through the lens of Wagner in Aphorism 240.
He describes Wagner's Meistersinger overture as magnificent, ornate, heavy, and late art, combining strengths and decline. This is German in the best and worst senses. Multiple, informal, inexhaustible, and clumsily barbaric.
And this music expresses his view that the German soul lacks a present.
The Germans, he argues, are from the day before yesterday, and the day after tomorrow they still have no today. They possess an awkwardness, an unwieldy guise, something capriciously barbaric yet solemn, overflowing with future potential, but lacking definitive form in the present.
Aphorism 244 describes the German soul itself as multiple, piled up and pieced together.
Due to its mixed racial composition, a people of the middle, the German soul escapes definition, driving others to despair. It is the labyrinth of passages, caves, hiding places, and dungeons. Goethe defined the German Gemüt temperament as tolerance towards others' weaknesses as well as your own. Their highest achievement is their ponderous ability to endure, to be a great underground labyrinth.
He also laments the decline of music following Mozart in Aphorism 245.
Mozart represented the finale of a great European taste, Rococo, courtesy of the heart. Beethoven, while brilliant, was transitional. Romantic music was second-rate. He specifically critiques Schumann as a merely German event, noble and tender, but with a fundamentally small taste. With Schumann, German music was threatened with losing the voice of the European soul and descending to mere fatherlandishness.
Aphorism 246 addresses the deaf German reading habits.
He says Germans read only with the eye, not the ear, keeping their ears in a drawer. They fail to recognize the art in every good sentence, ignoring tempo, rhythm, and the artistry of vowels. They are culturally deaf to the nuances of style, which reflects their ponderous tempo.
And Aphorism 247 crowns the only true German prose masterpiece, Luther's Bible.
Because the ancient world valued reading aloud, German prose suffered until Reformation. The masterpiece is, by all rights, the work of its greatest preacher, Luther's Bible. Compared to it, almost everything else in German is just literature, lacking the rhythmic force and genuine rhetoric needed to command the spirit.
He offers a pretty harsh assessment of the English in Aphorism 252.
Oh yeah, the English are an unphilosophical race. Philosophers like Bacon, Hobbes, Hume, and Locke degraded the concept of philosopher. They are gloomier, stronger-willed, more sensuous, and more brutal than Germans, requiring Christianity's discipline more intensely.
And their Christianity is symptomatic of their psychological disease.
It smells of the very spleen and alcoholic dissipation against which it is used as a remedy. Their greatest offense is the lack of music dance, timing in their souls and bodies, contributing to their gloom.
Aphorism 255 moves to the future, dreaming of a super German music.
Nietzsche dreams of music being redeemed from the north, a super German, super European music that stands its ground before desert sunsets. This music must know how to be at home among huge, beautiful, lonely beasts of prey. This music, crucially, is one whose rare magic consists in no longer knowing anything of good and evil. It is music of pure affirmation and power.
This leads to Aphorism 256, his startling political vision. Europe wants to be one.
Despite the nationalist nonsense of the day, profound thinkers, Napoleon, Goethe, Beethoven, Wagner, were already good Europeans, only becoming patriots when wresting from themselves.
And he sees Wagner's art as stemming from super German drives.
Wagner's instincts called him to Paris. His art is deeply related to late French Romanticism. The figure of Siegfried is too free, too hard, too cheerful, too healthy, too anti-Catholic for old cultures. The mysterious labor in the souls of all profound people of the century has been focused on preparing the path to this new synthesis. The Europeans of the future, unified by a shared, aristocratic, and unpious spirit.
And now we arrive at the final major section, Part 9, What is Noble? Aphorism 260 distinguishes the two basic types of morality, master morality and slave morality.
These are determined by whether the ruling type is high-bred, the masters, or low-bred, the slaves. Master morality originates from a ruling type who feels itself to be the sole determiner of value. It is egoistic, it honors the strong, terrifying, and powerful. Good is noble or powerful, bad is weak or contemptible.
And slave morality is a reaction against the powerful.
Slave morality originates from the oppressed, those who suffer, and is essentially a morality of utility, a means of holding up under existence. It honors qualities that alleviate suffering. Pity, friendliness, humility. For them, evil is powerful and dangerous. Good is unthreatening, bonhomme, easy to deceive.
He also says the desire for freedom belongs to slave morality.
It does. Conversely, the passion of love had a purely noble descent, invented in the knightly poetry of Provence.
Aphorism 261 analyzes vanity, something the noble person struggles to understand because it implies submission.
Vanity requires seeking and then believing good opinions about oneself that one doesn't hold. This lack of self-respect is distasteful to the noble, who already determines their own value. Vanity is an expression of atavism. Ordinary people, dependent on masters, still wait for an opinion about themselves before instinctively deferring to it. The slave in their blood erupts, submitting to external judgment.
Aphorism 262 discusses the necessity of breeding for the species.
A species, like an aristocratic community, only grows sturdy through long struggle with unfavorable conditions. Abundant diets and overprotection lead to variations, wonders, and monstrosities, but not sustained excellence. Aristocratic morality is necessarily intolerant about education, marriage, and law because it needs to foster specific, unwavering virtues, warlike, clever, strict for survival in constant struggle.
Aphorism 269 details the unique torment of the born psychologist.
The unriddler of souls needs hardness and cheerfulness, because the ruin and destruction of higher, exceptional people is the rule of nature. This torment forces the psychologist to fear his own memory and constantly seek a cure by dealing with normal people just to retain sanity.
And here he states a vital truth about history.
Success has always been the greatest liar. The work, whether it's art or philosophy, invents the creator after the fact. In the world of historical values, counterfeit rules. The great men we honor are often simplified, moralized fictions created after their death. He uses the example of Jesus' life being a holy fable and disguise for the martyrdom of an innocent heart dissatisfied with human love.
Aphorisms 272 and 287 provide the unmistakable signs of nobility.
The noble soul reveals itself by never thinking about debasing privileges into duties for everyone. They consider privileges and the exercise of these privileges as a duty toward future generations. But the most fundamental certainty a noble soul has about itself is simple. The noble soul has reverence for itself. It is its own standard of value.
Aphorism 292 characterizes the philosopher as a storm.
A philosopher constantly experiences, sees, hears, suspects, hopes, and dreams extraordinary things. He is struck by his own thoughts as lightning bolts. He is perhaps a storm himself, a fatal person in whose vicinity things are always rumbling. He runs away from himself, afraid of himself, but is too curious not to always come back and face the danger of his own thought.
The book concludes with Aphorism 296, Nietzsche's poignant reflection on his written thoughts.
He reflects that his youthful, malicious thoughts are losing their sharpness and turning into truths, immortal, pathetically decent, and boring. He only has colors for their afternoon. No one will guess how they looked in their morning, his sudden sparks and wonders, his old, beloved, wicked thoughts. He is saddened that the very act of writing and formalizing philosophy sanitizes its initial vital danger.
So wrapping up this comprehensive deep dive, Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil is fundamentally an act of psychological investigation into the origins of our most sacred values, truth, morality, religion, to see if they enhance life or diminish it.
It asserts that these values are often rooted in weak character traits, fear, and the herd instinct, serving to suppress the higher individual. The book demands the rise of a new philosophical nobility. Individuals who, driven by the will to power and the pathos of distance, can create new values for the future, standing truly beyond good and evil.
And I think the immense value of reading this work is that it functions as a powerful mental tonic. It questions the objectivity of your entire worldview, allowing you to confront the necessary illusions we live by and feel less worried about the inability to account for your core convictions in an absolute way.
Because everything is an interpretation, a perspective rooted in will. And that leaves us with one final provocative thought to mull over. If we accept Nietzsche's claim that the discipline of great suffering has been the sole cause of every enhancement in humanity, and that high culture requires the spiritualization of cruelty, is the contemporary world's total war against all suffering, the attempt to achieve universal green pasture happiness, a force that, despite its humane intentions, guarantees the long-term deterioration and eventual decline of the human species.